Now think about it. What will our little universe of intellectual debate, exchange of thoughts, ideas, impressions, information do without some of its brightest minds? And one of those minds is a person called Ruchir Sharma. Now, Ruchir Sharma is a global investor, thought leader, and an author. And every year in his Financial Times column, he gives a kind of prognosis for the coming year. Now, this year, he has listed 10 points or 10 highlights where he sees the world moving. Now, you can read the article. I will share a link to the article with you. You want more of his views, him explaining the views, you can check out his discussion with Dr. Pranay Roy, Two Fine Minds Talking. I will also share a link to the NDTV website with you. I, on the other hand, am making use of it to further take that discussion forward. Because what do good writers do? Ideas people do? They provoke you. So this is a very provocative set of ideas, and I am trying to see how these ideas apply to India. Also doing a kind of SWOT analysis in terms of what is it that will add to India's vulnerabilities, what is it that will work to India's strengths, what is it that India needs to worry about that might work to India's disadvantage, and what is it that India can take advantage of. So briefly, here are my thoughts, my analytical thoughts based on someone else's ideas, or based on someone else's ideas which are provocative. So I am provoked, and I am also trying to provoke you into a larger discussion, because that is the spirit of Cut the Clutter. Very often we work with, more often than not, we work with borrowed wisdom, because we pick up wisdom from wherever it's available, by reading, by understanding, by studying, by listening to people, and then bring it to you. So 10 points that are listed here. I will quickly go over the 10 points. They will run on the screen also. I will tell you the first point first, that the world now is seeing a deflation in populations. Now that is something that we've spoken about in more than one episode of Cut the Clutter, and I will again share a couple of the links from our past Cut the Clutters with you. There was a study at Lancet, study also by one of the UN organizations, showing that globally now population growth has slowed down substantially. Not only has it slowed down, in more and more countries, it's becoming negative. In fact, all these estimates also tell us, including our own National Family Health Survey estimates, that India's population growth is not going to be what we had suspected it to be, or in conformity with the horror scenarios that were painted. In fact, India's population will stabilize much earlier than we had thought. It may even begin to reduce much earlier than we had thought. So while that's a good thing, that's also a negative, because as India produces fewer new babies, India's average population age will rise. And as average population age rises, that is when dependency ratio goes up. What is dependency ratio? Dependency ratio is the ratio of people who earn and ratio of people who no longer earn, who are too old to earn, who on the other hand depend on the state, or in many ways on the taxes that people in the earning ages, taxes or support that they are getting from those in the earning ages. That is dependency ratio. Now, you will find in many European countries that dependency ratios is very high. Why did we see such high mortality from COVID in European countries? Because see, Germany, Italy, countries like those have a mean age of 47, 48 years, whereas India had 28 years. India has about 28 years. In comparison, Pakistan, which produces a lot more babies, has 23 years. And maybe Afghanistan, if I remember correctly, 17 or 18 years. So India is at 28, it will rise. So India's demographic window, which India had to take advantage of, is now shrinking. It is still there. I would say we've lost about 10 years from it, but another 10 years is available to us. So if we lose any more time, that will be our detriment. That will be to our detriment. So our advantage is that we still got this window of 10 years when China is slowing down. In fact, China is very worried that their population growth has stopped. Chinese couples now no longer produce even 2 children, although they are allowed to. Many don't even produce 1 child. Chinese government has been trying to incentivize more baby production. But as all authoritarian regimes can figure out in the course of time, or will figure out in the course of time, you can coerce your people into producing fewer babies. That's what the Chinese did with their one-child rule. So they coerced all their population to produce only one baby per couple. Now they suddenly find they have too few babies. And meanwhile, their society has become much richer than before. China's per capita income is more than 5% higher than India's, and inequality levels are much lower than India's. So in that situation, more and more couples don't want to produce babies, not even one baby. So the Chinese can incentivize them to produce 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, but you can't coerce people into producing more babies. No matter how powerful Mr. Xi Jinping might be, he can coerce people into producing fewer babies, not into producing more babies. So that is the problem that China has right now. India has that little window of advantage, but once again, given our education system, our public health system, our unemployment, there is a real fear and there is a real threat that this advantage will turn into a disadvantage, and very soon our population will also begin to gray, and we will not have access to kind of reserves and resources that, say, the Chinese have, or that the more developed societies or countries have right now. So I will use this data point from Ruchir. He says that at this point in 2021, in 51 countries of the world, population had begun to reduce, right? This number was only 17 in 2017. So 17 into 3 is 51, right? So the number of countries where population has begun to reduce in the past 21 years, between 2000 and 2021, has gone up 3 times. And that tells you that globally now populations are reducing. In fact, in one of the studies we had shown you that the only countries in the world going ahead up to the end of the 21st century, that will be increasing population, only countries in the world will probably be in parts of Africa. All others, including India, will be seeing a reduction in their population. So that's a sound future forecast. Number 2, that China has peaked, that China can no longer ensure global growth. China is no longer the engine that drives the entire world's growth, particularly the emerging markets' growth. So Ruchir points out that in 2021, Chinese growth was 1/4 of global GDP growth, whereas earlier it was 1/3. And the correlation that you had in the past between Chinese growth and the emerging markets growth has now disappeared. Now the question is, who moves in there? So the immediate reaction of us nationalist Indians would be, oh, obviously we have the size that China has, so we should move into that situation. But are we ready for that? Are we doing everything that is necessary for India to move into at least a part of that advantage, or part of that space that China is now vacating? And China is vacating for this space for many reasons. One of the reasons is government is meddling in Chinese business. We've seen Xi Jinping now go after Chinese big fintech companies, Chinese edutech companies, because he sees Jack Ma's and the rest as a kind of threat to himself or threat to the system. And he's now talking more and more about equality in the Chinese society and also self-reliance. Now, you have to again think, are we learning the wrong lessons from China? Because if Xi's drive towards self-reliance is not proving good for China's economy, would Atmanirbharta, self-reliance by another name, work much better for India? Those are things for us in India to reflect on, and we need to reflect on these very, very, very seriously, because China's slowing down, I will not say decline, China's slowing down is an opportunity for India. But right now, that opportunity is being taken by Cambodia, Vietnam, the Philippines, and Bangladesh next door. India is not moving into that opportunity. Next is debt trap. So he says that the whole world is seeing a rise in debt. Now, see T.N. Nayanan's article that we published on the print also on Saturday. T.N. Nayanan tells you that India's own debt to GDP ratio has gone beyond 90%, from 80%, and way above the ideal of 60%. So all over the world, debt is going up because central banks are printing money. They are keeping interest rates low. They are not even worrying so much about inflation. So a lot of money is available, but nobody wants to counter it because everybody is afraid that if we counter it, it may slow down growth or it may ruin employment or it may bring negativity. Also, a lot of the world now, particularly the democratic world, is being ruled by populists. And they don't want to risk anything, any tough measures that will make a large section of the population, particularly the middle classes, unhappy. So this low interest business has also become a kind of an opiate or alcohol or a drug addiction or whatever you call it. It's now an addiction. And nobody is addressing it. See what's happening in India. 90%, more than 90% of GDP, as T.A. Nayanan told us. And you can see a lot of the Indian companies, a lot of the Indian households also have a lot of debt. So that is something for India also to worry about. And India also has to think, how long can we go on holding on to these low interest rates as inflation is going up? Because inflation has gone up to some extent in India. And at some point, it will begin to affect the poor in a way that they also complain. Right now, Modi government doesn't care so much if the middle classes complain because they think the middle classes will keep voting for them anyway. The Hindu middle classes will keep voting for them anyway. But once it starts affecting the real poor, the inflation, then it will bring in political pressure. So you might have a situation where interest rates have to go up. And if they start going up, and we've already begun to see some of that happening, yields on Indian sovereign bonds have gone up by nearly 30 basis points, if not more, over the past couple of weeks. That's an indication that we are now looking at a regime where interest rates may start rising. So that is the next point that we draw from this. Which of course says the 1970s kind of inflation will not take place. What is the 1970s kind of inflation? I can only explain it to you in the Indian context, or in any case, I'm trying to explain everything to you in Indian context. In 1974-75, for the first time, India's inflation, annual inflation rate had reached not just double figures, but into late 20s, that is 26, 27, 28%. And that happened because of a combination of factors, combination of negative factors, beginning with the Yom Kippur War and the formation of OPEC and oil price hike, crude price hike globally. Also in India, this rash of ultra-socialist policy, populistic decisions by Mrs. Gandhi. And then her biggest economic error, which she reversed, but by that time some damage was done because inflation had gone up. That was her effort under the advice of her very leftist upper crust advisors to nationalize grain trade in India. And that caused chaos. She reversed it. The only socialist decision she reversed, because her advisor said, if it can happen in the Soviet Union, why can't it happen in India? But India is India, Soviet Union is Soviet Union. It did not happen in India. She withdrew it. But that's when our inflation had gone up to that much. And that's when I keep referring to this again and again. Look at the biggest hits of Hindi cinema. At that point, they all refer to Mehngai. So that is something that he suspects will not happen because governments are a lot more conscious. So technology will come to our help. But at the same time, some assets may go through deflation. For example, stock markets. Now look at the way stock market has risen in the last year. And everybody says, what kind of a contradiction is this? It's so counterintuitive. The global economies are down. Economies have had a negative year. Families have suffered, incomes have fallen, and yet stock markets are going up. Now, the simple explanation for that is because the pandemic also enabled companies to cut costs. Companies laid off staff, they cut salaries, they cut bonuses, and they took a deep breath and improved efficiencies. Essentially, they cut a lot of costs, because of which their profitability has gone up. But it's also that a lot of easy money has become available because of central banks printing too much money, keeping interest rates low, people getting a lot of money in developed countries, people getting a lot of money by checks that governments have sent to them, say in the US, in many parts of Europe. And that with that money, people have gone to the market. So that's why it looks like stock markets might be inflated. We will see what happens. I am no expert on stock markets. Please do not take my advice. That is a very clear warning. But I'm just looking at a larger macro trend as we go ahead into the next year and beyond. Then his point is greenflation. Now that is a fascinating point. And frankly, it's so provocative that we could have actually invested an entire episode of Cut the Clutter in this idea of greenflation, and I might do it in the course of time as I learn more. I have to read up more, and my young colleagues who help me with this stuff also have to read up more and give me a little more gyan. But what is greenflation? Greenflation is that because now there is so much emphasis on green energy, on green everything, prices of commodities, copper, lithium, aluminium, which are used in low energy consuming or renewable energy products, those commodities are going up in prices. That is greenflation. Other side of greenflation, there are two sides of the same coin. The other side of the coin is that because of the fear of global warming, nations, economies, companies have invested less and less and less in oil and gas. And we've seen some of this happen in a big way, in a very stark way with coal in India, because there's been so little investment in coal across the world that we've just seen several periods of coal shortages and near situations of near power plant shutdowns. In fact, as we speak, Indonesia, for other reasons, not environmental reasons, has again stopped export of coal, and you can again see some problems coming up in the world. The China we saw last year had a real crisis with coal. Again, the reason is that too little investment in coal has taken place. Coal is in bad odor. Nobody wants to invest in coal. Nobody wants to dig out more coal. So that also leads to inflation because coal becomes more expensive. Coal has become more expensive. Crude has become more expensive. So this is the other side of the coin of greenflation. And that is now going to be part of life. So as humanity struggles to control global warming, some things, a lot of the commodities will become more and more and more expensive. Lithium is a very good example. There is a fascinating point here on productivity, that everybody thought the global productivity had been declining over the past few years. I think we are all becoming more smug and becoming less poor and less driven and maybe less ambitious, that the pandemic will reignite global productivity. But that has not happened. And Ruchir quotes a survey, and I will lay my hands on it, and maybe one of my colleagues will do a larger story on this. And this is a survey internationally done, that while during the pandemic people worked from home. Now, there are two views of work from home. Some of the old timers think work from home is just sitting villa, not doing very much, pretending to be busy. People should be in office and work from there. A lot of people who are working from home, including I at this point, we might think that, work from home is relentless. There is not a moment to spare. You think that you are at work all the time. Wouldn't I be better off being in office, working 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, whatever number of hours a day, and then coming home and doing my own stuff, right? The truth is very interesting and counterintuitive. The truth is, according to this survey, that work from home means people are spending more hours at work. So certainly our reading that at home, this is relentless, we don't have a break, we are working all the time, that is true. At the same time, the output has become less than before. Now, I know this will be a very debatable point, but that is the reason this is such a provocative point. So if you've been working from home, think about it. How does it work? Does it sound reasonable to you or not? And write to me. We'll reply to you. Maybe we'll discuss some of your points going ahead. There's a trend next that we all see, which is data nationalism. You've seen in India also lots of push to keep India's data within India. There are fights with global data giants. And in the rankings that are put out, India is number 3 when it comes to data localization or data nationalism. That itself will be a threat to the global internet-driven growth. And I am surprised in this data that after China and Saudi Arabia, India is the 3rd when it comes to controlling data. Even Russia, it's not that much better, but marginally less worse than India. But India is also much worse, say, than Turkey. So that tells you that for all the noise people make saying that, oh, all these global data giants are taking away all of India's data, India is actually being quite possessive about its data. And again, going ahead, India has to think. I know nationalism is very, very sexy, but India has to think, what is better? Is it better to be more liberal, to be more global in our thinking when it comes to data? Or should we also be more possessive like the Chinese or the Saudi Arabians? So that's a question that India will have to face going ahead. Ruchi talks about bubblets and he explains it. Watch his discussion with Dr. Roy. He explains it very well. Basically, within this larger global market, there are some elements. For example, cryptocurrency. Now, I am a crypto skeptic. I know that people say that that's because you don't understand any technology, you are outdated, you are a boomer, blah, blah, blah. I plead guilty to all of that. But the fact is that crypto, clean energy companies, the big deal lately has been clean energy companies. Invest in clean energy companies, right? And also tech companies. And we've seen this movie before in 2000. It was then called TMT, Technology, Media, Telecom, right? These sectors had got overheated. And he mentions that these have already fallen 35% over the past year. And usually, he says, after anything falls, an asset falls more than 35%, it rarely recovers. So I don't know. Each one of these sectors has its loyalists. And again, I have zero knowledge except to say that at least I would not put any hard-earned money into an asset I don't understand, like cryptocurrency. And just because I don't understand doesn't mean it's a fake, right? It may be all there in real thing. I don't know, but I don't understand it. But these are areas of trouble. Then, again, this is a trend that an investor will pick up. A lot more retail investors are coming into the stock markets instead of just the institutions, hedge funds, banks, etc., fund managers, etc. And that possibly is because a lot of easy money has become available to individuals. In India, the number of retail investors in the stock market has really ballooned. Now, that could also be because India has kept interest rates quite low. A lot of money is available. So also because interest rates are low, money is available. People also don't know where to take that money because real estate has not been rising. Banks give you too little interest. A lot of the people now complain that bank interest rates are too low. So where do people take their money? They take it to the stock market. So a lot of the retail buyers are getting into stock markets. Now we don't know whether they will benefit from it or they will get burnt. Are they taking the right advice or not? But that is something that India, SEBI, regulators, also those who play the markets in India, they all have to worry about. Because I've also seen data over the past several weeks that FIIs are selling a lot in India. At the same time, all that they are selling is being absorbed mostly by Indian retail buyers. So that's a very interesting trend that is applicable to India as well. And finally, that everybody thinks that we now live in this Facebook world or whatever it's called, metaverse, Facebook, and all that matters is virtual. That nothing that matters is physical. But you know what? These papers from which I speak, these sheets of paper, and I work on both sides of them, this is physical and this matters. Now you can maybe put it all on a teleprompter and say, see Shekhar Gupta, this physical nonsense, you don't even need paper. Paper is so old economy, right? Forget it. I'll give you a nice big teleprompter, you read from that. But that teleprompter also needs glass, it needs copper, it needs plastic, right? It needs electricity, but that electricity has to come from somewhere, may come from gas, may come from coal, it will still need a turbine. So what is physical will always remain necessary. So as human beings grow, they will need homes to live in. As they have homes, they will buy a lot of cars. Now cars may not run on gas, but they will run on something else. So the physical world will not diminish. In fact, with rising prosperity, while a lot of things in our lives will become virtual, there will be a lot of hunger, a lot of need, a lot of demand for physical things, and that particularly applies to commodities. And that is what we have seen over the past year also. There has been a massive global commodity price boom, from coal to steel to aluminum to lithium to everything else. And finally, very often I find questions from some of you about these scarves or mufflers that I might be wearing. So look, in my business, in journalism, we never endorse a brand. Never, right? But there are some things that I can endorse. So these mufflers I will happily endorse. These come from Uttarakhand. There's a marvelous group of people. In fact, it's a couple who have now been working with weavers in Uttarakhand. And this is an NGO or an organization called Himalayan Weavers. So check out himalayanweavers.org. This stuff is available online, I think, but also has stores in some parts of India. These are very warm, very nice, very good looking, very cheap. And remember, these involve the labor of some of our more skilled and poorest of artisans. So please do support products like these.